Welcome to everyone that is joining us. We're going to give it a few minutes to allow all of our attendees to come in. Hey, numbers are starting to slow down just a little, but we'll give it about one more minute. Good morning to everyone. So we want to make sure we can get to every part of our program today. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Again, good morning to everyone joining us. I want to start today this celebration with words from a former slave. Now you do know why they raised that white flag. Well, honey, that white flag was a token that Lee had surrendered. Glory, glory. Yes, child, the Negroes are free. And when they knew that they were free, they, oh baby, began to sing. Mammy, don't you cook no more. You are free, you are free. Rooster, don't you crow no more. You are free, you are free. Oh hen, don't you lay no more eggs. You are free, you are free. Such rejoicing and shouting you've never heard in your life. Words from Fannie Berry, an enslaved woman in Virginia that was interviewed in 1937. Again, good morning and thank you for joining us to celebrate the history and the legacy of Juneteenth. A large part of celebrating Juneteenth is engaging in education. So we have invited an amazing speaker, Dimitry, Anselme, to not only educate us on the history of Juneteenth, but celebrate the freedom and the culture. Before I introduce Dimitry and hand over the virtual stage, I want us to remember that we are not only honoring our ancestors that celebrated freedom on June 19, 1865, we are also remembering and honoring those that did not live to see that day. Those that lie in the depths of the sea, and those that died on this land, actively fighting for the freedom of my people. We cannot properly celebrate this day without acknowledging first Titus, Venus, Bilhah, and Juba, slaves that lived and worked in Wadsworth House under former Harvard presidents. When we were on campus, which seems like a lifetime ago at this point, but when we were on campus, I often walked past Wadsworth House to read and reread the plaque that is there honoring these individuals. I would reflect on how they probably couldn't have imagined a day where Black people would work and study at Harvard, or there would be a Juneteenth holiday, or there would even be one day that Harvard would publicly recognize Juneteenth as a holiday. We are, in fact, our ancestors' wildest dreams. On last Friday, I reflected on that long overdue progress while also being painfully aware of the work that is still to be done. So as we celebrate and learn today, I want us to keep Titus, Venus, Bilhah, and Juba in our minds. Let us honor them freedom they never had the chance to see, and celebrate the progress and contributions of Black people. With that, it is my honor to introduce our speaker. But before I do that, I want to go over a couple of logistic things, and that we do have closed captioning. And so if you click that closed caption button at the bottom, you'll be able to access that. Also, the chat function is there, and we really want the chat function to be a space of celebration, a space for us to engage with each other as we are learning and as we are celebrating Black culture. The Q&A function, that is to be used to send questions to our speakers. So we will have a Q&A portion after Dimitry concludes his talk. So please use the Q&A function for questions, and use the chat as a way of celebrating this amazing holiday. Dimitry is the Executive Program Director for Professional Learning and Educator Support at Facing History and Ourselves, an educational organization whose mission is to use the lessons of history to challenge teachers and their students to stand up to bigotry and hatred. The organization was founded in 1976, has 7 US offices and 2 international offices, and a variety of educational projects around the world. In his role, Dimitry oversees all of the strategic program planning for the regional offices, the online learning team, and the organization's internal staff development. Dimitry has over 25 years of experience in education. He was a high school history teacher in Worcester and in Brookline, Massachusetts. He was the high school principal at the Academy of the Pacific Rim Public Charter School in Hyde Park. He was born in Haiti. He grew up in the Democratic Republic of Congo and immigrated to the US. He is a single dad of 2 teenage boys. Dimitry went to Clark University for his undergraduate studies and to the Graduate School of Education here at Harvard for his graduate work in administration and school policy. Please join me in welcoming Dimitry. Dimitry, we absolutely look forward to hearing from you today.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be with all of you today. I want to say thank you to those of you who invited me to speak, because I think all of you working at Harvard and being at Harvard are in the seat and have direct access to some amazing scholars. So I thank you that you are inviting me to come. But this is the work that I do. I work for an organization where we treat history as very sacred, and we create curriculum for students around the country and around the world to think deeply about really learning and confronting our violent past. And we don't just look at the history in the US. Of course, we also look at the history of genocides that have happened around the world, but it's about developing the skills to allow young people to see the violent past, but also to teach the history of heroes and sheroes who have engaged, have taken on the democratic mantle to transform and change the world. So I'm excited to be with all of you to talk about a period of history that I've studied for a long time and truly respect. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen to bring up my presentation for a couple of minutes. So I'm going to apologize already for all of my tabs, but bear with me. And let's review. Great. Okay, so as we mentioned, I work for Facing History, and you've heard about the organization in the chat box. You can use it to do some questions and answer should you want to. That should work fine. So hold on 1 minute. I'm going to stop sharing and go back for a minute. So I'm going to start with kids in the classroom. So we're going to try to reproduce a classroom. I know we are over 100, but I am going to try to create a space for questions, dialogue, and for many of you to be in interaction. We talked about Titus, and I wanted to start actually with the memory of Titus. It's because we are at Harvard, I think it's important to center ourselves and root ourselves with what's happening. So in the spring of 1737, the Harvard faculty barred Titus, whom they describe as a mulatto slave of the late President Wadsworth, from entering students' rooms or even coming on campus after he was found drinking with undergraduates. 3 years later, they had to repeat the same prohibition. So again, I'm just going to stay here for a minute, read this for yourselves, and imagine, who is Titus? Why is Titus on campus? And why is Titus hanging out and drinking with the students? And then I will invite you to think, is that Titus' only interaction on the campus? If he's hanging out in the dorms and if he's drinking, is it possible that Titus is also sitting in the classroom? Just keep that in the back of your mind as we are going to enter into this, but I do want to bring the memory of Titus as well as we've saluted others. Here's another moment that's interesting. In 1751, the following 3 students are punished: Samuel Foxcroft, Samuel Quincy, and John Hancock. And the punishment is for making drunk a Negro manservant belonging to Mr. Sprague to such a degree as to endanger his life. Endanger his life. Is this social drinking? Is this a prank? What are they doing to this man? To the point where they forced him to drink, where they were endangering his life. And these are prominent folks that we will come to know in American history later on. Again, so this is grounding it that as we're going to talk about Juneteenth, we have to ground it in the context of slavery, in the history of slavery, which has permeated American life and society. It is present. And as James Baldwin says, history is never history. So it means that these memories, these moments surround us. They shape this conversation today, they shape this gathering, and they shape how we understand the past. So a couple of contracting for what's going to happen: dialogue, raise question, be receptive to new information and to old information. Some of you may already know this. And then encouraging for civil exchange, which does not mean no display of emotion. Of course, that is totally acceptable way of learning, of expressing oneself. So why are we here and what memories are we honoring? So simply said, Juneteenth is about June 19th, 1865, in Galveston, Texas. General Granger Gordon issues an executive order number 3, which reaffirmed that the abolition of slavery or involuntary servitude is formally abolished in the state of Texas, and this announcement will lead to celebration in many Black communities throughout the state. So if it's executive order number 3, what does that suggest? And what I'm going to ask you is to go ahead in the chat box to put in some of the chat box. So what can you assume if we're talking about executive order number 3? What does that raise for you? And Alexis, I'm going to ask you, if you don't mind, as people are putting in the chat box, to just read me some of the answers.
Yes, and then we did have a question in the chat of were you sharing your screen because people were saying they weren't sure if they should be seeing your screen or not at this time.
Yeah, so I'm sharing. Are you able to see my screen or no?
No, we are not.
You're not, okay. So thank you actually for that. You should be able to, so let me go back into, are you now able to see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Apologize for that. So in the chat box, if you all can tell me, if you hear executive order number 3, what does that suggest to you?
We have some answers of it's coming from the president.
Okay.
People wondering what executive order number 1 and number 2 were.
Great. Great. Excellent. So thank you. Definitely, right? It suggests that there's an executive number 1 and number 2, and we ought to know what those are. Of course, number 3 is the most popular one of them. So this order does not come from the President of the United States. The President of the United States is dead by this time. This order comes from General Gordon Granger, who is in charge of what we're calling the District of Texas. So it's right after the war. So as you can see, my second bullet, the Civil War ended in April 1865. The order is issued on June 19th, 1865. In April, when the war ended, General Lee surrendered. 28,000 troops and soldiers are allowed to return home. So it means that those who were serving in the Confederate Army had very lenient terms, and most of them were free and allowed to return home, which meant that many of the soldiers who were fighting on behalf of Texas had already been home by then, because it was only about over a month by the time. What it means is that Texas is under military occupation. The Union Army has entered the state of Texas, and executive number 1 is the one that says, actually, you are under occupation, and executive number 2 just formalizes the right of General Granger to control the state of Texas. In order to enter the Union, the state of Texas is going to work on creating a new constitution in order to be reaccepted into the Union. But until then, they're under military occupation. And that's important because it frames for us Juneteenth and order number 3. The Union Army has to say that slaves are free, although there was an executive order since 1863 freeing all the slaves in the state of Texas during the war. The folks in Texas said, well, that executive order is issued by Lincoln. He's not the president of the Confederacy. We don't have to follow those rules. The Confederacy surrenders in 1865, but because of our system, each state is independent. So the state of Texas does not have to surrender just because General Lee surrendered. So again, in this context, it means that it's not until the Union Army enters the state, takes control of the state, and the Army says, actually, you're not operating under Texas law. You're not going to operate under the law of the military. So Juneteenth is oftentimes surrounded by a lot of myths. And here's the primary myth that usually you'll hear that drives me crazy. The idea is that the forcefully enslaved Black population of Texas did not know that slavery was abolished. So that is totally, totally not true, not historical. Of course they knew about Lincoln's order of 1863. And of course they knew that they were free because news traveled. First of all, there was a vibrant Black press throughout the country. You had an informal network of news going through even among the enslaved populations. So again, news probably traveled more slowly, but they were fully aware. And many, not many, I would say probably all Blacks in the state of Texas knew that the Confederate Army had lost the war. Well, why? Because there was an influx of families from the South fleeing into Texas as early as February when they were beginning to lose the war, bringing their slaves into Texas because they were viewing Texas as the last bastion. So many slaveholding families fled into Texas, brought their slaves with them, hoping that this was going to be the last bastion. And the slaves knew that because also, as I said, since April, the soldiers who were fighting the war were returning home. So the soldiers were saying, we've lost the war. So of course, the Black population of Texas knew that the war was over. And as I said, the order is issued by the Union Army. So of course they know that now the state of Texas is under the occupation of the Union Army. So here's General Order number 3. I'm just going to give you a couple of minutes so you can read it for yourselves. And in the chat box, what I would love for all of you to do in the chat box is just put in one word that stands out to you from the text. Just one word from the text.
So we have freedmen, hired, idleness, property, remain, collect, equality, wages, employer.
Great, thank you. Thank you. So yeah, these are great words, right? So we're picking up in the text the freedom of the abolition of slavery, shifting of economic relationships. So now it's going to be free service, you free labor, and you get to work and be hired. But that last sentence, many of you picked up words on it, is very interesting, and I will come back to it, right? But look at that last sentence. They are informed that they will not be allowed to collect a military post. Why? Well, because that's what they were doing. Remember, as I said, the myth that somehow the slaves did not know, that's not true. Wherever the Union Army went, what African Americans did in all of the southern states where slavery was in existence is they packed their stuff, took their families, and followed the army, or went to army camps because they knew then they would have physical protection from the army directly from many of their masters, former masters who had kept them in slavery. And then the last sentence, and they will not be supported in idleness, either there or elsewhere. So that's an interesting thing to say, hey, you can't congregate at military posts, and then you can be idle either here or anywhere else. And we'll come back to this idea of once free, Blacks are going to be idle. So what this will do is, after what Juneteenth celebrates, I would say, is the new United States of America that you and me all get to live in and celebrate. The freedom of the former enslaved people creates a new constitution. So the current constitution that we all live with is not the original constitution. There are 3 amendments that are made at the end of slavery that creates the United States of America that you and I actually know and interact with. And those are those 3 amendments: the 13th Amendment, 14th, and the 15th. I can say that most Supreme Court cases, and you can review most of the Supreme Court cases that have come out, the major cases that are deciding political and cultural issues of the day, are resting on Amendment 14th and 15th. And we'll come back again to some of these things. So really, it's a new constitution. Those 3 amendments drastically changes. And 13th Amendment, of course, abolishes slavery. The 14th Amendment gives the right to citizenship, but it's a key one. As you all know, if you follow the news, every conversation about immigration, about citizenship, rests on the 14th Amendment. And then, of course, the right to vote, which are given to only Black men in the 15th Amendment. We will need another amendment to give the right to vote to women much later. But again, those 3 keys amendment create the modern American society that we all know of. So here, I'm just going to give you a minute to read the 13th Amendment. And it's beautiful because it's short. And when I'm teaching this with kids, I actually make kids, again, pull out the words, pull out different words in this. That's very interesting because it's an interesting amendment. It starts by saying that slavery or involuntary servitude shall not exist within the United States or anywhere where the US has control of. But there is that clause, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted. So that clause connects to the clause we saw about the idleness. What is quickly going to happen once African Americans are freed, what you will see are a variety of laws that are going to emerge in the former slaveholding states, known as vagrant laws. So if you are a vagrant, meaning you're just walking around, you don't have an exact residence, you're not rooted in a place, you're considered to be idle or vagrant. So vagrancy laws are going to begin to be imposed, particularly on Black men. And the reason why they're vagrant is because they're looking for work. These were former enslaved folks who have not been given homes or property, so they need to move and look for work. And as they are moving about and looking for work, a variety of vagrancy laws are going to be developed, and they're going to be claimed to be idle because you don't have a job, and therefore you could be arrested. And if you are arrested, then you have committed a crime, and therefore you can be forced into involuntary servitude and slavery. And I think many of you do know this, that although very quickly, although slavery is abolished, very quickly, within about 10 to 15 years, many African-American men in particular are going to find themselves back into involuntary servitude because they were convicted for crimes. Alexis, can I pause here and ask you, if you don't mind, to run the video? So I'm going to stop my screen sharing. So I think I gave you the screen.
Yes, I can do that.
So this video is just going to create a context for us for what happens after Juneteenth, right? What happens during this period that we're going to call the Reconstruction period.
We're never fully going to understand who are you, who am I, how did we get here, what are the problems that we're facing, unless we understand the histories that produce that.
Reconstruction, to my mind, is the most vital period of American history.
People were making history, out of the ashes of war, creating an entirely new country.
The transfer from slavery to political liberty, practically overnight, had never happened anywhere else in history. This was a bold set of aspirations.
And it set in motion civil rights, notions of equal citizenship, the empowerment of Black people, the idea that white people and Black people could work together, could live together, could govern together, could love together in a way that was unprecedented in American history. That was not going to be accomplished in 15 years, but it set in motion a series of things that we're still wrestling with today as a society.
Who is a citizen? What should the rights of citizens be? What are the relationships between the federal government and the state governments? How do you deal with terrorism? That's a Reconstruction issue.
Those central questions of who is an American, what does it mean to be an American, and what is the American government, and therefore what is America, are really laid down from 1865 forward.
But all of this was happening in a society that had to face this and try to deal with this and define all of this practically overnight in the wake of an all-out war. It's a story of how ordinary people facing very difficult odds, tried to create a better society, try to create a functioning democracy, try to create a semblance of equality in this country.
In its highs and its lows, and its tragedy, its corruption, it's just a remarkable story, and every student of American history should know it.
Thank you. Again, this period that's going to be unleashed from Juneteenth on, as I've said, creates the bedrock of the American society all of us get to know today. And it means that the American notions of freedom, the American notions of democracy are rooted in the experience of the Blacks who were enslaved in the country. It is their experience that provides for a new definition of what freedom would look like, what a democracy would look like, what multiracial coexistence looks like. All of it come directly out of that experience. And those three amendments are not generated by white politicians. Blacks, men, and Black women are in conventions drafting, writing, advocating for these amendments. They have to go through white politicians to get them, but they are very active in shaping all of this. So I'm going to conclude with just one last thing to share with all of you. Again, it's just to give you a context of how to think about this history, that the Black experience is not, when we think about American history, the Black experience is not marginalized. The Black experience is at the very center of the American experience, because it is the Black experience that is providing for the notions of freedom, the notions of what a democracy looks like. So let me share with you this last document. And Alexis, can you see my screen?
Yes, we see it now.
Great, wonderful. So this is a document called, and on your own, you can go back and see it. It's called the Savannah Soliloquy. It's a fantastic, amazing historical document. It's probably the document about American history I love the most. And I love teaching this with young people. Because what happens in here is it's right after the war. Actually, it's during the war, but it's in Savannah, and I'm sorry, I have to go back to it. General Sherman enters a free Black community, a community of former enslaved folks who are just coming back, who have just received their freedom, and they are meeting with the general. And now I have to go back, because I seem to have lost it. Sorry. Okay. And so he's in Savannah, and he interviews a Black community. And it's amazing, again, because oftentimes we all of us operate with stereotypes and myths about the enslaved people. Many of us think, and we have bought the idea that the enslaved people were highly illiterate. Not true. Many of them actually knew how to read. Many of them had to hide the fact that they knew how to read. But again, through informal structure, the Black community was teaching their own children how to read. But in this particular community, they are meeting with General Sherman, and the community appoints a gentleman called Garrison Frazier, who's a minister, to speak to the general. And this, called the Savannah Soliloquy, is an interview where Sherman basically says, hey, do you understand that President Lincoln just passed a proclamation making all slaves free? And his answer is, he says, yes, we understand it. We've read it. We totally understand the proclamation, and we've shared it with other people. But we understand that beginning on January 1st, 1863, all of us will be slaves. And he also notes, which is interesting, he says, in the rebel states, right? Because again, Lincoln does not free slaves in the Union. He only frees the slaves in the states that are in rebellion. So they have an understanding of that, which means like we've read the text and we understand the nuances of the text. That's an incredible document because what it does is, which very few textbooks in the world does, it gives voice to the enslaved people. This is the enslaved people speaking when you read the Savannah Soliloquy. It's not an historian telling us, it's them telling us what they know and understand about the condition and the response. But here's what I find the most amazing in this, is look at number 5. Look at the question Sherman asked them. Do you think there is intelligence enough among the slaves of the South to maintain themselves under the government of the United States? Are you intelligent enough to be free under the edict of a government? And look at the beautiful, magnificent response with dignity, simple. I think there is sufficient intelligence among us to do so. That's just, it's an incredible sentence to me that I think every document, every history class, every English language class in the country should have kids reading this document, and it should form the basis of an anti-racist K-12 education in the United States. We all should know this document, and we should all know that sentence. When he's being asked if he's intelligent enough to be free, look at his response. I think so. Thank you very much. I mean, it's so clear. And again, it's giving voice to the enslaved people themselves. So I'm going to pause here, see what some questions you may all have around what I've just shared and the period.
Thank you, Dimitry. And there are tons of comments in the chat around people saying how much they are learning from this. So we definitely appreciate your sharing that knowledge with us. So we do want to move on to a couple of questions that we have through the Q&A. And the first question that we have is, I did not grow up in the US and did not learn much about the history of the US, not to mention slavery in school, but a large group of my friends and acquaintances who grew up in the US, most are in their 40s and 50s, said they weren't taught about Juneteenth in school either. What can we do to make sure information about Juneteenth and the history of slavery and post-slavery is included in school curriculum?
So I think, again, it speaks to the failure of our American education system that we have not committed yet to an anti-racist, again, K-12 education system and curriculum. And when I say that, I don't mean that I necessarily advocate for the removal of statues and so on. I think this is important work to do, removing names and so on. But I think as we remove names from buildings or remove statues, what I would call for as an historian is for plaques. Do not lose the history. You want plaques, you want to document who these people were and what happened there. Because you don't want it to be gone, especially in a society like American society that chooses to be ahistorical. So what I think we need to do is change the curriculum. This is the effort of Facing History, but there are tons of other organizations who are doing that. And it's not just the history curriculum, but we ought to be looking at science as well. And again, long history of scientists, African-American scientists involved in creative endeavor throughout the nation. That should be the bedrock. Again, same thing in the literature and the arts. The entire modern American society, especially for those of us like you, I was not born in the US. But what is the US known outside of its border? It's the very source of the creative, it's the art, the culture, the music, the sports of American society that we know outside of the US. And where does that, what's the source of all of that? It is the African-American community. It is the Black community that is at the very source of what the Americans are selling externally outside of the country. So I think we need a shift in our education system in the text and what we're exposing to kids. The last thing I want to say, also because I didn't grow up in the US, I immigrated here by the time I went into high school, born in Haiti and grew up in Africa. All of us, no matter whether we are immigrants from Asia, Africa, the Caribbean, every single immigrant in this country today is in the United States and is able to work and have access to the US because of the 14th Amendment. So again, when I say that the American society we know is created out of that experience, it's the 14th Amendment. Because it is the 14th Amendment that gives you the right for naturalization. It is that amendment that then shapes all of the following immigration policies that are going to emerge out of the country.
Thank you. So in thinking about the amendments, we have a question that, can you explain how that clause in the 13th Amendment regarding the exception for criminal conviction was inserted, and if there has been discussion of removing it?
Oh my God, great question. You know, I don't know if there are conversations about removing it. If we were to do so, we would have to go through an amendment process, which I think with the current political environment, the last thing you want to do is to have them touch any of this, because then, you know, I don't, Lord knows what they're gonna want to add. The reason why it's included, it's because it situates, you know, the thing about history is you have to understand it in that moment, right? We can't understand it in our world today. So in the context of the time, the conversation is what you saw in the Savannah Soliloquy. It's open conversation as to whether Blacks are intelligent or not. And whether that if let free, will they not regenerate or become criminal? Now, those conversations still happen today, right? It's this idea, so our intelligence is always questioned and our criminality is always questioned, right? It's this idea that if you scratch, boom, our criminality is gonna pop out. So that's the root of that question, right? So if you free the slaves, will they become criminal? So in many places are concerned that they're gonna have high crime rates, that either the former slaves are gonna be angry and they're gonna rebel, they're gonna attack the former owners, and so on and so on and so on. And so there's concern for the kind of crimes that are gonna come. So as a political compromise, slavery is abolished, but we're saying, but yeah, you may have involuntary servitude if they're arrested and have committed a crime. But what that will then do is an invitation to create tons of criminal laws. And there are 2 books to the subject, if you are interested. Read a book called Slavery by Another Name. And there's I believe, now I'm looking at the title, I believe it's Confessions of Blackness by a professor who is actually at the Kennedy School. Confessions of Blackness actually traces the emergence of the criminal laws after the Reconstruction period and its intersection with the growth of police and departments and so on and so on.
Thank you, and that actually kind of answered another question that we had within the Q&A of, is that clause the new form of slavery?
So, great question. So it's a bit hard for me to answer, right? Because when you work as an historian and you work with documents, each word is critical, because remember, these things are being written by lawyers and so on. So these words are never there by chance. So the fact that we're using the word slavery and involuntary servitude means something. So technically the slavery we knew is no longer existent? So is there a modern day slavery, a new way? That's still open for debate, right? Lots of conversation happens. We know that we have contemporary slavery. I'm sure you've read the news of what's happening in North Africa, in many of the predominantly Arab countries of North Africa that have been enslaving African migrants coming out of sub-Saharan Africa. So that form of slavery exists. But the plantation crop system of the United States, I think that system has faded. But quickly, many of these folks are going to be moved into what is called involuntary servitude, which then connects very closely to the prison system and so on and so on. And so, is it slavery? I think it's an open debate. But if it is, it's not the slavery that we knew or of the old system.
Yes, so it has taken a new shape, a new form, but it absolutely exists through the prison system and mass incarceration and how the laws are written to force primarily Black people into your point during your lesson. Those laws started right after Juneteenth. So one of the questions we have is around 40 acres and a mule. And someone said, did some formerly enslaved people receive their 40 acres and a mule before the promise was broken?
So yes, and actually the documents that I was showing you it's a textbook that we've created for schools, and we have a couple of primary source documents. Again, we intentionally selected all of our documents to come from the perspective of the former enslaved people, because we think it's important that the kids study this history through the eyes of the former enslaved and not through the eyes of the oppressor. So many receive the 40 acres and a mule, but very early in the war, between 1862, as the Union Army begins to come into the slave-holding state, they are giving 40 acres and a mule. So many African Americans in those communities are going to receive those 40 acres and a mule. Now, why? Largely, the Army is doing this as a military tactic, because it's a way to deprive the slave owner from making money and providing money and paying taxes to the Confederate government, who then can buy weapons and so on, right? So it's a military tactic. It's an instrument of war by depriving your enemy of its livelihood. So they're redistributing these to many of the African Americans. But here's what's going to happen. In 1865, once the war is over, remember what I told you, the term of the surrender war, very light. All the soldiers are allowed to return home. Within a year, as these states are changing their constitutions and readmitted to the Union, many of the slaveholders go to court to demand their property back. And many will get it. So in it, we have an amazing document of a Black man who is speaking on behalf of his family and others. So it's a collective suit where he's saying, wait a minute, the government of the United States does not have a right to take what you have given me as a property back to somebody who lost it because he was a rebel to the government. Like, there is no legal logic to it. These are African Americans saying this, right? So some were able, again, because of our political system, it goes state by state. In some states, some communities were able to preserve the 40 acres and a mule. Many lost it. So many had them, they were able to keep them, but within a period of about 10 to 12 years, the properties through legal courts are retaken by those white families. And many of African American, and again, we have it in the textbook, where you find like there are things from women and men, African Americans, were saying, hey, if you take our property away, you're taking our livelihood away. Like, how are we supposed to be free if we cannot feed for ourselves, work for ourselves, and so on? You are asking us to go back into slavery. And you see this repeatedly. Again, it breaks this idea that the slaves are illiterate, don't know what's happening to them. They're fully aware. They're like you and us. They know what's happening. They know what they need for their freedom, to guarantee their freedom.
And the denying of that is so connected to things that we see today, and the disparities when it comes to economics and income and the ownership of property and things of that nature. Goes back to us being denied access then to that 40 acres and a mule. And then the destruction of property makes me think of when we did work and acquire things such as Black Wall Street, it was taken from us once again.
Correct. And I think, this issue about the concentration wealth is potentially another conversation that's going to be very difficult for the country to have. I know we're having one conversation right now, really largely around police brutality and Black Lives Matter and statues and names, but the one about concentration of wealth will come. is probably going to be even more difficult because it goes back to these roots about these, and whether we do reparations or not and so on, I think that's still a debate. But the denial of our inability to concentrate wealth, which is the way most white Americans have been able to make their own wealth, was denied all along, right? So there is no property to pass down to your children. So your children are not able to inherit and start off with something else, which again, most of white Americans were not denied that. Things like Social Security. The Social Security system, when it first started, Blacks couldn't collect it. The professions that Blacks were in could not have it. So again, as you all know, if you have Social Security in the 30s and you die, you pass, you can pass on that Social Security payment onto your children, right? Your children can inherit that, which many white immigrants who come to the country in the 30s and 40s and the 50s benefit from. Their parents benefit from that. At the death of their parent, the parents are able to pass that on to them. Then they can then use that to put in as a down payment to buy a home, and on and on and on, right? So again, it's this piece when I think those of us who are immigrant come in and we want to know, well, where do I enter in this issue? Well, this is how you've entered into the system.
And when we talk about that denying access, we also have to, being that we are educators, we also have to bring into the conversation how laws were written that even those that serve this country in the military and coming back into this country, many of the laws and grants and things that were written around access to higher education were denied to Black soldiers.
Totally. I mean, most of the programs, even for World War II, that were created for home ownership, college attendance, and so on, were not initially given to African-American soldiers. They will be later, but it's going to take, again, court battles to get to those things.
So one question we have is, could you please speak to the difference between using the terms Black versus African-American? I didn't know if they were interchangeable, and then lowercase Black with a lowercase b and uppercase.
Great question. So Black for me, this is an interesting, I've been following this whole debate. In my mind, Black has always been capitalized B. So I'm surprised by this whole debate. I'm like, ooh, I'm trying to think myself like, maybe I don't know English. It's my second language and I've been misspelling it all along, but it's always been for me, capitalized B. I use it interchangeably. I know that there's also a lot of conversations around that. So I think when we say Black, at least when I use Black, I am using it, to acknowledge that it's Black skin and that Black skin has played a role in terms of the way the ancestors and those of us who are living today are viewed and treated and experienced life. So it's undeniable. I use Black in a broad term. So Black can include therefore those who are born in the United States, those who are like me from the Caribbean, and those who may be from Africa, Brazil, South America, and so on. So Black is a broader term. When I speak of African Americans, I use it to speak to the Blacks who are Native and African Americans who happen to be Black, right? So the folks who are directly within that historical tradition. So for example, again, I am Black, but I'm an immigrant, right? My slave history and tradition, they were in Haiti. So different piece, they were in Haiti, then some parts of them connected to to Louisiana, and of course, interact and play a role in this history that we're talking about, but the tradition are just slightly different. So I'm speaking specifically to those Americans who had Black skins who were enslaved in the American context.
And so to our last question before I hand it off to Lori for her spoken word piece is, this is a celebration. When Juneteenth comes around every year, it absolutely is a celebration for our people. And so some of the traditions, can you kind of reference some of the traditions around that Juneteenth celebration?
Great. So again, Juneteenth, sometimes when you hear about it, people will tell you, as I said earlier, the idea that people didn't know. So by the way, if you're gonna have a celebration, and at least if you come from Black culture, Black folks don't do celebrations spontaneous. It was planned. They knew that they were gonna have Juneteenth. So there was quite a lot of, the communities were arranged and organized. So in terms of traditions, they oftentimes gathered and they would have prayer, a lot of food. partying and celebration were happening in families. There are reports that the early Juneteenth celebrations, families were coming from across the state to do it. Remember also, as I said to you all, that many of the African American families in Texas for that first Juneteenth celebration were not necessarily rooted in Texas. These were enslaved people who had been brought to the state. So many of them had roots either in Alabama and Georgia, in other places, right? So there was truly a sense of homecoming. You gather with your kinfolk, you celebrate it. So lots of food, prayer, and reading of a variety of texts. There is an historian in Texas, I'm blanking on the name right now, who actually is doing research, trying to get access to what were some of the original either documents, songs, and prayers that these early communities used and celebrated. And again, I think it's going to take a little detective work, but it's a thing that we can access.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask Lori to come back, and as a part of our closing, we thought it appropriate, because art is absolutely a part of our culture, that for us to close today with a spoken word piece.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay, so I'm going to read We Rose by Christina Kay. From Africa's heart, we rose. Already a people, our faces ebon, our bodies lean. We rose. Skills of art, life, beauty, family, crushed by forces we knew nothing of. We rose. Survive we must. We did. We rose. We rose to be you, we rose to be me. Above everything expected, we rose. To become the knowledge we never knew, we rose. Dream, we did. Act, we must. Thank you.
Thank you, Lori, for that piece. And I wish that we were in person, because this would be the point in the program where I say, let's eat, and we have barbecue and tea cakes and red foods, those traditional dishes of Juneteenth celebrations of our ancestors. And we will definitely do that next year for our Juneteenth celebration. But as we close today, we cannot leave this space without recognizing the ways we should all be engaging in the fight for Black people to truly be free and not be held down by systemic racism, anti-Blackness, and the hate that plagues our country. Just as our ancestors did, we must fight to dismantle systems of white supremacy. I urge each of us to support Black businesses, support activist organizations such as Black Lives Matter, and never hesitate to loudly say, Black lives matter, Black students matter, Black history matters, Black scholarship matters, and in the words of Fannie Lou Hamer, nobody's free until everybody is free. Thank you for joining us. Please enjoy this slideshow that we prepared honoring Black STEM and library scholars. So this is an event that is a collaboration between SEAS and the Sciences and Harvard Library. So we share this with you to honor those that came before us within these fields and those that are with us today.
When the glory comes, it will be ours, it will be ours. Oh, one day, when the war is won, we will be sure, we will be sure. Oh, glory. Glory, oh, glory, glory. Hands to the heavens, no man, no weapon formed against, yes, glory is destined. Everyday women and men become legends. Sins that go against our skin become blessings. The movement is a rhythm to us. Freedom is like religion to us. Justice is juxtaposition in us. Justice for all just ain't specific enough. One son died, the spirit is revisiting us. True and living in us. Resistance is us. That's why Rosa sat on the bus. That's why we walk through Ferguson with our hands up. When it goes down, we woman and man up. They say stay down, and we stand up. Shots be on the ground, the camera panned up. King pointed to the mountaintop, and we ran up. One day, when the glory comes, it will be ours. It will be.
Thank you so much for joining us. Have a wonderful rest of your Friday and wonderful weekend. And we hope that you will join us again when we continue having these community conversations and celebrations. Bye-bye.